Now, today marks the 43rd anniversary of Black Wednesday, when the apartheid government banned 19 black consciousness organizations and several anti-government newspapers such as The World and The Weekend World on the 19th of October 1977. The principal and vice-chancellor of the University of Pretoria, Professor Tawana Kupe, has written a media piece, Media Freedom Critical to Preserve Democracy. He joins us now on Zoom. Professor Kupe, thank you so much for making the time to join us today.
Thank you, Desiree. Always good to be.
You speak about democracy demanding substantive responsiveness to media by government. And this is something that SANEF has been complaining about. You actually touch on that piece. Let me just read here. You say, in the 6 months of hard lockdown, the president only addressed journalists twice for about 90 minutes each time. South African citizens have not had their questions answered, including how the COVID-19 billions have been allocated and who have benefited. As we remember Black Wednesday, why is this conversation important?
Very important because Black Freedom was the day on which the apartheid regime, which was a regime against any freedom whatsoever, went for independent organizations, like you said, civil society and their freedoms and freedom movements, and also went for the jugular in relation to the media. So this is the past we want to forget. This is a past that does not belong to a democracy. This is a past that our constitution firmly says is not the future. The future for South Africa is a vibrant democracy. You cannot have a vibrant democracy without a vibrant media. Many things go into creating a vibrant media. Media diversity, government officials, up to the president, to the councillor, facing the press or facing the media to answer questions and to account to citizens, citizens getting a voice and platforms to say how their life is going and whether we're getting a better life for all. And journalists and media investigating any form of corruption, malfeasance, maladministration, and violation of human rights.
What are your thoughts about the overtures the president has made to media in an effort to be open? Is it sufficient?
No, I don't think I think it's to be commended, yes, but it's not sufficient. What the gestures he's making, which are commendable, must become the norm. If you notice, and this is not a good example because that particular president does not say interesting things. Trump appears regularly before the media. So does Boris Johnson, a president in democracies. A very regular appearance, especially in times of crisis, is very, very important. Because why is that important? It's uncertain, people are unsure, people suffer all sorts of depression, and also people are losing jobs, and they don't have hope for their future. The office of the president or office of elected officials is the offices that must give them the assurance by openly answering questions as regularly as possible and also in as robust a fashion as possible.
You say that constitutional protection of freedom of expression does not equate to media freedom. What do you mean?
No, I'm saying that in South Africa, actually, in contrast to Black Wednesday, the reaction to creating a new democracy was to entrench strong constitutional freedoms in the Bill of Rights. So it's very difficult to change that part of the constitution, and there are strong protections for freedom of expression, freedom of the media, and academic freedom. That is what should obtain in a democracy. But having something in a constitution, some people often call a constitution a piece of paper. I think it's more than a piece of paper. Does not translate into what happens on the ground. So my previous example about elected officials not being regularly available to the media, not answering in time, sometimes not answering at all, and not saying things voluntarily that are important to the nation, is exactly the kinds of practices that, in essence, make hollow the constitutional promise and the constitutional safeguards. So policy, if you like, constitutional intent and democratic rights must actually, on the cold face, in society, in people's lives, merge together and be perfectly aligned.
President Mandela famously said that every generation has its mission to carry forward. What's different about the work of journalists such as Percy Qoboza, the legacy of Steve Biko, the kind of challenges they were facing in terms of the apartheid system that deterred them from carrying out their journalistic work? How do you compare that to the challenges of this century?
Well, they were faced the worst nightmare. They had no democratic rights. They were not considered full human beings. They could not vote. They were not protected by the Constitution. And that is why their human rights were violated willy-nilly. And they were killed. Steve Biko was killed, and many were exiled, including the journalists that suffered on Black Wednesday and their organizations and so on. The difference between now and then is that we have actually a strong protection in our Constitution of all our fundamental human rights, and even further, our Constitution is strong on socio-economic rights, and many constitutional court judges have ruled in that favor. So we need to actually to turn that constitutional promise, the rights we have, if you like, into actual reality and create a better future, reimagine a better South Africa. And this requires the politicians and other public officials, including the private sector and civil society, by the way. It's not just, and also academics coming to the party with information and engaging the press, and citizens also that are inquisitive, inquiring and asking for accountability. That will make our media information rich, a robust space for discussion and debate, and that is one key ingredient for creating a prosperous, just society where social justice, human rights are observed, and there's free flow of information, transparency, and all of those things. So we are in a much better position than they were, but we could be accused of not actually doing as much as we could, given that the framework is so enabling.
In your other commentary about the journalists of that era, you say this legislative support for media freedom is a far cry from Black Wednesday, October 19, 1997, when apartheid South Africa jailed and exiled journalists and banned opposition media outlets. However, there's no case for complacency, as there are still multiple threats to media freedom today, some more insidious than others. What threats are there to media freedom in this era?
The first one is the lack of media diversity. Because what the apartheid regime did there was to reduce the amount of media, especially the ones that they didn't agree with. Always to advance freedom of expression, through you grant media their freedoms, and you don't do censorship and bannings. And that actually ensures that a multiplicity and a diversity of views about the different policy choices, decisions, and directions a society can take can flow fairly freely, if you like. So if you have very few media organizations, you don't have that kind of diversity, because media must also compete, but compete not just commercially, compete with actually giving access to the widest possible diversity of views, from women, from young people, from any of those who are marginalized in society. Second, journalists themselves must also observe media ethics and not be captured by anybody, whether it's commercial interests, politicians, and other powerful interests in society. And that they must give factual news. So this phenomenon now, which is misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, that is called fake news. And I don't believe we should use the word fake news. As I've said before, news has no surname. Journalists must adhere to factual correctness. They must also make sure that when they deal with an issue, different perspectives and views come into being, not just privileged voices of powerful men and powerful corporations and institutions. And then the third thing is also citizens must be willing to hear different opinions and views. There have been some instances in our past, not that, where people have threatened media and threatened journalists. That also is not acceptable and should not be allowed. We must cherish our democratic freedoms, and we must ensure that we all protect them.
Yeah. The other element you touch on, which almost touches a nerve here at the SABC, is the climate under which we operate, and you're talking about declining revenues and competition from online sites. How do we get around this?
So I think in relation to the SABC, we know what the SAB has suffered. It suffered also from elements of what is called state capture. And frankly, in some instances, very bad management that should not have been there. And also, and that is why it is now, in a sense, has to get bailouts from the government. The SABC must be capitalized. It is the people's broadcaster. It's not called a public broadcaster for nothing. That's why we have to pay the license fee. We as the public own it, not the politicians, not the ruling party, not anybody. So the SABC must be recapitalized out of bailouts, and then also digital migration must happen so that the SABC can compete on digital platforms, must be strengthened because it is the only organization that reaches every South African in their languages. There's no other media that does that. It is the largest number of audiences. And most strong democracies around the world have a strong public broadcaster at the center of the media system and not peripheral to the media system. So the SABC must be given enough capital to be able to actually develop online digital ventures and must be protected from any interference by whosoever, including having to be over-reliant on advertising and so on and so forth. Because that threatens editorial and programming independence. Only those programs that can garner large audiences because of the advertising, then get there. So you don't have a plurality and diversity of images and representations. So the SABC is the one media organization every South African owns. And that must show by the way in which we fund it, manage it, protect it, and keep away from any form of interference.
So you reckon there is a case for a public broadcaster still?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, look at the many Scandinavian democracies and in Europe. They still have a public broadcaster, and they have more internet penetration than we do, more digital availability and accessibility. And when right-wing elements and conservative elements threaten their democracy, the comeback is always from the fact that they have a public broadcaster at the center of the system. So, and for us who are a developing country facing so many things, all forms of inequality, poverty, unemployment, lack of information, lower levels of literacy, nothing like a broadcaster educates the public. Always the public broadcaster's mantra is inform, educate, and entertain. For many commercial broadcasters, they do that but at a lower scale and to select audiences that are actually more commercially exciting for them. So to get a South Africa and to reimagine a better South Africa that approximates what the Constitution says, we should create a new society that is equal, just, prosperous, where there is a sustainability in every respect. You need this machine called the public broadcaster, well-funded with exciting programs, factual information, reaching every South African and giving a voice to every South African. And the politician regularly appearing in front of it to account to the public.
I'm going to ask you your thoughts about, I know there's multiple issues that we could speak about in relation to South African conversation, but I'm just going to whittle it down to two: state capture and COVID-19. What are your thoughts about coverage of these two issues? For argument's sake or for interest's sake, last week a big story broke about the impending arrest of ANC Secretary General Esma Khashule, which was then refuted by the Hawks. He was reported to be worried, and then he was reported to not be worried at all about this. What are your thoughts about how media is approaching the coverage of the unfolding state capture story as evidence continues to emerge out of the Zondo Commission and COVID-19?
Let me start with COVID-19 because, I think that the media, all of it, but particularly the SABC, did what a public broadcaster does and is necessary. In a public emergency, the media often have to actually make sure they focus on that. In fact, in war times, for example, when we're at war with the virus, governments could commandeer such media to actually, in a sense, give information to the public for their safety and all of that. And I think that the SABC did quite a lot in giving platform to the president, as did other broadcasters, and then giving platform to the ministers as they allowed regulation. That must have disrupted a lot of your programming, and you are dependent on advertising. And when you disrupt programming, that has commercial consequences, if you like. And that is why also we shouldn't be reliant on advertising. So kudos, well done in that particular kind of respect. But perhaps what you didn't get is sufficient, more critical, more robust engagement from the politicians. It should have been nice after the president made this, what people call the family meeting, for him also to have faced a panel of editors for a robust discussion and debate. And related to state capture, on coverage of the Zondo Commission, I think also well done. There's often live coverage of key witnesses and testimonies and so on. I think that in downstream, though, in relation to like the Mahashule story, they realized that dangers where disinformation campaigns and diversion campaigns could actually, in a sense, lead to capture of the story writing, the narrative writing, and lead to distortion and confusion for the public. So maximum vigilance and also reliance on ethics, fact-checking, and also standing back from the story and seeing who might be trying to manipulate. The space of the media is a space where people want to manipulate, even sometimes even very ordinary people and so on. So maximum vigilance is very important, because we need to come to facts and an understanding of what is this women's state culture and what damage did it do, especially in relation to spreading a culture of corruption and also the diversion of public resources for private gain and so on. So I think that just generally coming out of the phase that people call state capture, the media is rediscovering its freedom and needs to expand and stay on that plane or that terrain, if you like, because that is what will contribute to making South Africa a successful democracy and also to engendering a public trust in the media.
Let me just ask you finally, as the University of Pretoria, what are you doing to engage and help in the process of what you say that quality media is facing a perfect storm?
So what we're doing at the University of Pretoria is basically we are following now a form of research called Trans-Disciplinary Research. This is the research that it seeks to address public issues, whether it's COVID, poverty, unemployment, economic growth. But we do that very much conscious that we must engage the media and translate our academic language and our findings into the public domain where politicians can benefit, the public can have a better understanding of it. So through COVID as well, you could see that we were very much University of Pretoria academics were available to be interviewed by the media. And I'm always available as Vice-Chancellor, trying to lead from the front, analyzing issues for society and making society be able to understand. Because universities are also like the SABC, the public broadcaster, they are public institutions for public benefit. The knowledge they have, they must boast about it and preen around as professors, but they must actually translate it into a language you can transmit back to audiences, because that improves the levels of knowledge, understanding, and a society that knows. It's a society that develops, a society that deals with injustice, it's a society that maximally realizes the potential of its resources and its own people's ability. So you will see much more of this. A University of Pretoria that doesn't stay inside the fence, but actually gets out of the fence and wants to actually deliver societal impact, working together with the media and with societal stakeholders.
Let's thank you again for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you, Desiree, and thank you to your viewers.
Professor Tawana Kupe is the Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Pretoria. Any moment now, we'll also be talking to Vusi Qoboza.